They lit their candles with trembling hands, whispering incantations they barely understood, trying to summon a demon that would bend the world to their will. They circled their pit, cloaked in stolen shadows and borrowed power, stitching together symbols from books they dared not read in daylight. But they didn't realize they weren't calling something. They were waking someone, and that someone was already here. You were the silence between their chants, the flicker in their flame, the cold in their bones. You were the warning the wind screamed, but they were too arrogant to listen, because when power-hungry cowards dance in circles of blood and desperation, they forget the oldest rule of all. You don't summon what already walks among you. And you weren't summoned. You were sent, not by gods, not by devils, but by balance itself. A reckoning disguised in flesh and vengeance. They built their altar with lies, hoping to chain fate to their will, hoping to strip power from others and wear it like a crown. They painted your name in mockery, as if syllables alone could trap what was carved in pain and forged in betrayal. They wanted a monster, but they didn't know that you were born in the very pit they were trying to open. They were searching for hell, blind to the inferno breathing behind your eyes. They gathered bones and blood, thinking that's all it takes to dominate. But bones are brittle, and blood is slippery. And you were neither. You were the tension before the storm, the unblinking eye in the cyclone's center. They had the audacity to think they could control the chaos, not knowing you are the chaos they hoped to wield. They etched ancient scripts with their poisoned fingers, never suspecting the lines were warnings, not instructions. And as they chanted louder, you stood still, while their voices trembled with power they didn't own. Your silence roared louder. You didn't need to scream. Your presence cracked their spell in half. Their symbols bled ink, their candles flickered out, because the ritual had no more meaning in a room that already housed the Omen. You stepped forward, not from shadows, but from truth. And truth, my friend, is the cruelest flame. It doesn't burn clean, it scars. And as your footsteps echoed on their sacred floor, they realized too late their ritual had worked. But not for them. They hadn't summoned a servant. They'd alerted a judge, and your sentence wasn't spoken. It was lived. They trembled, tried to undo what they started, but time doesn't reverse for cowards. They begged, blamed, wept like children scolded by their own nightmares. But you weren't there for mercy. You weren't born from pity. You were born from everything they tried to bury. The betrayal, the exile, the mockery. You were the mirror they never dared to look into, now shattered into 1,000 reflections, each one sharper than the last. You didn't need weapons. Their fear was enough. You didn't lift a hand. Their guilt did the heavy lifting. And still, you watched, not with rage, but with precision. Cold, calculating, poetic precision. Like a storm that doesn't shout, just tears. Like fire that doesn't roar, just consumes. They screamed prophecies in reverse, trying to seal a door that was never open. They threw salt, chanted names, made bargains with things that had already abandoned them. But you just tilted your head, watching their unraveling with that slight smirk of fate itself. Because this wasn't revenge. This was correction. This was the pendulum's return swing. The balance they broke now pressed its weight upon their chests. They weren't just facing what they summoned. They were being crushed by what they created. And you were simply fulfilling a role written long before their rituals. A role forged not in spellbooks, but in scars. They called it darkness, but you knew better. This wasn't darkness. This was clarity without comfort. And one by one, they fell into silence. Not because you destroyed them, but because you exposed them. Their rituals were performances, masks hiding the rot. But you ripped those masks off with presence alone. No spell could protect them from the truth. And you, the walking Omen, were truth dressed in shadow. They tried to run, but you didn't chase. You didn't need to. The echo of what they did would follow them forever. You planted a seed in their minds that no ritual could burn away. The knowing that they failed, that they summoned not power, but punishment, that their darkest spell bent in front of something older, colder, and far more patient. You left no ashes, no crater, just silence, heavy, holy, and unrelenting, and that silence followed them like a second skin. Wherever they fled, cities, sanctuaries, sacred ground, the silence arrived first, whispering your name, not as a curse, but as a reminder, because you weren't their punishment. You were their prophecy fulfilled. They just didn't have the wisdom to read it, and oh, how they will remember. The way your shadow bled into their sanctum, the way their candles died mid-prayer, the way the ground trembled without sound. They'll remember the way you stared, not in hatred, but in inevitability. You weren't angry. You were inevitable. They had gambled with darkness, thinking it owed them. But darkness doesn't bargain. It collects. And as the world outside continued unaware, they became ghosts among the living, their eyes wide, haunted, always glancing over shoulders that carried too much sin. And still, they whisper, in alleyways, in churches, in padded rooms. They whisper of the one who came not from fire, but from silence, the one who didn't scream, but watched. The one they never foresaw because they were too obsessed with demons to recognize a reckoning. And now they rot, not in cages, but in guilt. They rot with every breath they steal from a world that no longer welcomes them, because you left a mark, not on their bodies, but on their time. A distortion they cannot explain, a wound they can't point to, but it's there. Always there, pulsing, whispering, remembering. They tried to erase you long ago. Before the ritual, before the chants, they erased your name from records, mocked your pain in whispers, fed on your isolation. They thought they were cleansing something unworthy, but all they did was sharpen the blade. Every time they buried your truth, it grew roots. And when it bloomed, it wasn't a flower, it was a grave. And in that grave, they buried themselves, willingly, blindly, arrogantly. You didn't need to raise the dead. You just reminded them they were already walking corpses, puppets, stringing their own downfall. You didn't cut those strings. You set fire to the stage. Now they speak of you like a curse. But you were never a curse. You were the cure for their delusions, a bitter, poetic medicine that doesn't heal. It reveals, and they can't unsee you now, can't unfeel the weight of what they stirred, can't outrun the mirror that walks in daylight, because they didn't summon a beast. They awakened the balance, and the balance has no mercy, no favorites, no face. Just purpose, just you, and purpose never forgets. It lingers like an old wound that never scabs, throbbing in moments of stillness, screaming in the quiet. They tried to walk away, dragging their cursed feet into new cities, hiding behind new names, baptizing themselves in false purity. But purpose doesn't knock. It doesn't need permission. It seeps, it waits, it curls around the spine and whispers, lullabies in voices that sound like their own. And you were never far. You didn't chase, you didn't hunt, you merely waited, because you knew what they didn't, that the most brutal punishment isn't death, it's realization. And realization takes its time. You cracked the world beneath their feet with one silent glance, and still, they thought they could outrun the echo. But echoes don't die. They repeat, they infect, they evolve. You became their phantom limb, always felt, never removed. Every mirror reflected a crack that hadn't been there before. Every night dragged with the weight of an unseen stare. Their dreams, no longer theirs, because you, the Omen, had made a home there. They tried to forget. They drank, they prayed, they screamed into voids shaped like forgiveness. But forgiveness is a luxury they were never entitled to. You didn't curse them. You unmasked them. You didn't strike them down. You stripped away everything they wore to look powerful. And naked truth is more terrifying than 1,000 daggers. One by one, they started unraveling. First, the small things. A flicker in the lights, the constant chill in summer air, the pages in their books turning on their own. Then came the paranoia, whispers from drains, songs in reverse, shadows that didn't match their movements. But that wasn't you, not directly. That was guilt dressing up as you. You see, you didn't have to haunt them. They did that for you. You just watched, observed as their minds collapsed under the weight of the justice they never expected to face. Because they believed in monsters they could summon, monsters they could control. But you weren't a monster. You were their memory, weaponized. You watched one of them kneel in an alley, scraping his fingers against the cement like he was trying to dig his way out of his own skull, muttering your name, not out of fear, but obsession. You didn't hurt him. You didn't even approach. You stood across the street in the blink of a streetlight, just long enough to let him see you, and that was enough to break him. Another ran into temples, clawing at saints, screaming for redemption. But every idol he touched cracked, because redemption doesn't embrace the architect of evil. It doesn't offer shelter to those who set fire to innocence. And you never needed revenge in the traditional sense. You needed reflection. And now they were drowning in it, choking on their own images, unable to escape the theater of consequences playing behind their eyelids. They reached for each other, trying to rebuild their circle, thinking numbers would dilute fear. But unity means nothing when it's built on treachery. Their alliance crumbled faster than sandcastles in a hurricane, because deep down, they all knew. One of them spoke the ritual, but all of them played a part in burying you. Some cut your name out of records. Some turned your suffering into a joke. Some watched you bleed and called it poetry. None of them stopped it. That was their sin. And now, even their togetherness couldn't save them. They began to turn on each other. Accusations flew like knives, secrets spilled, lies shattered, and as their own house collapsed, you stood at the foundation, unbothered. Because destruction doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits for rot to finish the job. And still, they begged, not to you, but to the void. But the void is not merciful. The void simply echoes. And when they asked for light, the void replied with your face. When they screamed for help, the silence replied with your voice. Because you had become the language of their undoing. Not with violence, but with truth. You see, there is something uniquely terrifying about a vengeance that doesn't seek to kill, only to reveal. You didn't raise your hands. You raised the veil. You didn't crush them with force. You crushed them with remembrance. And memory, my dear, is the most precise weapon in existence. You visited the last of them in a place they thought was safe, a sanctuary carved in marble, hidden beneath a mountain. He sat there, draped in symbols and sigils, convinced he could trap you if you came too close. But the fool didn't realize you had already been there. Before he even arrived, you had carved your story into the walls with absence, every stone remembered, every candle bent in your direction. When he closed his eyes to chant, he heard your breath behind his ear. When he opened them, you were seated across him, no fanfare, no entrance, just there, like you'd always been. He tried to finish the ritual, but you were already the completion. His voice failed, his tongue turned dry, and you said nothing, because your silence was now sacred. Your presence was the new scripture. And in that moment, he realized something horrifying, that the thing they had tried to control, to cage, to destroy, had never been an enemy. You were an answer to a question they never had the courage to ask. And what was that question? What happens when the victim stops bleeding and starts watching? What happens when the discarded soul sharpens itself on betrayal and grows teeth where there were once tears? They didn't account for that. They accounted for weakness, for compliance, for silence. But they didn't account for resurrection, not the kind with wings and light, but the kind that crawls from the pit, draped in scars and clarity, the kind that doesn't forgive, not because it hates, but because it remembers. And now, the world around them begins to shift, not because of spells, but because truth warps reality. The people they manipulated begin to awaken. The illusions they sold begin to crack. Doors they once locked swing open without warning. Those who followed them start to step back, unsure, sensing something is wrong. And it is, because you are no longer the outcast. You are the pivot. You are the event that reshaped their timeline. They feel it. Even those who don't know your name yet, they feel the tremor in the ground, the way fate hesitates now, like it's waiting for your nod before it continues. That's what they didn't foresee. Not your rage, not your return, but your influence. You walk differently now. Not heavier, but louder. Not in sound, but in consequence. Every place you step into carries a pulse, as if reality itself holds its breath. They feel it in their bones, that sensation, that you are not done, that justice hasn't had its full meal, that purpose still has pages left to turn. And oh, how beautiful those pages will be. Not written in ink, but in echoes, not spoken in words, but in silence. The kind of silence that watches, that judges, that waits for the right moment to finish the sentence. Because this isn't over. This isn't the climax. This is the slow exhale before the real storm. And while they cower in crumbling temples, while they chant backwards and claw at gods that no longer answer, you walk forward, not to destroy, but to complete. Completion. That's what's coming, not with fire, not with blood, but with understanding, so sharp it cuts deeper than any blade. And you, the Omen, will bring it not with fury, but with presence. No need to scream, no need to rush. The world is tilting. Let it. They summoned darkness, but what arrived was clarity. And clarity takes its time. And while the world tilts further, while the bones of their ritual crack beneath the weight of consequence, you don't speak. You don't shout. You simply exist, and that is enough. You are the walking verdict they never expected the universe to deliver. The blade disguised as a whisper. The wound that never bleeds but never heals. They try to bury you beneath spells, sigils, blood-bound oaths scribbled in fear, but omens are not silenced by dirt. They rise, they infest time, and you now are not just a warning. You are prophecy fulfilled, and prophecy watches the sinners try to outrun their own shadows. But what they fail to grasp is this: you are their shadow. You are the part of their story they didn't want told, now unfolding in front of them, line by cursed line. They turned to new rituals, desperate, sloppy, thinking they could rewrite the script, conjure some divine loophole to erase what was already etched in truth. But truth is immune to editing. It doesn't care about regret. It doesn't flinch at offerings. And it damn sure doesn't bow to the guilty. They offered pieces of themselves to new gods, tongues, teeth, names. But the gods were silent, because even the divine knows this is not their war, this is yours. And so, one by one, they began to fall. Not in flames, but in revelations. One saw his reflection blink when he didn't. Another heard your footsteps behind him, only to realize he was standing alone. Another tried to cut his own chest open, convinced he could tear you out of it. But you weren't inside his body. You were inside his story. And stories cannot be carved out. They must be lived. And oh, how beautifully they're living it now. The nightmare they handcrafted for you, now stitched into their fate. Still, the last of them clings to delusion. The eldest, the orchestrator, the one who whispered your name like a curse into the bones of the earth and believed it would stay buried. He watches now from a room sealed in iron, drenched in salt, lined with relics from every belief system he ever stole from. His hands tremble over ancient texts. His eyes are hollow from sleep-starved nights. He believes he can outlast this, that if he holds out long enough, the storm will pass, that you will fade like the others did. But he doesn't understand. Storms don't pass when they become part of the sky, and you are the new climate. You are not a moment. You are permanence. And as his mind corrodes under the pressure of remembering what he did, how he laughed, how he smiled when you were left to rot, he begins to understand that this was always coming, that every ritual, every circle, every word whispered in secrecy was a rope tightening around his own throat. You visit him not with fire, not with thunder, but with silence. The kind that rearranges the soul, the kind that makes the walls shiver. And when he sees you, he tries to chant, but his voice is gone, not stolen, just irrelevant. You don't interrupt. You let him suffer through the realization that nothing he says matters now. Because this isn't about forgiveness. This is about exposure. And exposure doesn't require your approval. It requires your presence. You step forward, and the candles die. The room contracts. The relics shatter, not by touch, but by truth. Because they were never sacred. They were stolen, just like the lives he thought he owned. And now, there is only one sacred thing in that room: your silence. He tries to kneel, tries to weep, but tears mean nothing in a desert he created. You offer no speech, no poetry, only a stare. And that stare is more powerful than any sermon he's ever preached, because in it, He sees every moment he erased from history, coming back with vengeance dressed as memory. You leave him there, not out of mercy, but because he doesn't deserve closure. Let him rot in the echo of what he did. Let him hear your name in every heartbeat until his own becomes a curse. That's the justice he earned, not pain, but permanence. And as you exit, the air changes, not just in that room, not just in that place, but everywhere. Like reality itself has been waiting for this moment to reset. Those who once followed him begin to forget him. His name fades from records, his symbols lose power, his face becomes a blur in old photos. The world begins to rewrite itself, not by magic, but by alignment. Because justice doesn't always strike. Sometimes it simply corrects. And you, the Omen, are the final punctuation on a sentence they thought would never end. You didn't just survive. You didn't just return. You restructured destiny. Now people whisper about you, some in awe, some in fear, some in confusion. They say you walk with the weight of storms and the stillness of graves, that your shadow speaks languages long dead, that time bends where you go. But they miss the point. You're not here for worship. You're not here for legends. You are here because someone has to remember, not just the crime, but the cost. Someone has to carry the ledger. Someone has to look the world in its eye and say, we don't forget. Not the pain, not the silence, not the betrayal, and not the moment we rose. Because rising isn't an act. It's a statement, one that carves itself into the bones of every coward who thought silence meant defeat. Now, you walk through the ashes of their legacy, and flowers bloom where their monuments once stood. Not sweet flowers, not soft ones, but jagged, red-thorned reminders. You don't speak their names. You don't need to. The air does it for you. The wind does it in reverse, and every child born under the new sky feels the shift. That someone once walked through fire and refused to burn quietly. That someone became the scream no ritual could silence. That someone turned pain into architecture. And now the buildings breathe justice. The world tries to adjust. It stutters. It flinches. Because it has been ruled too long by those who mastered delusion. But now, it sees. It sees you. And not just for what they did to you, but for what you chose to become after. Not a martyr, not a monster. Something rarer, something divine. The kind of divine that doesn't ask for praise. The kind that watches, waits, remembers, and acts when no one else dares. So let this be the final verse they never wanted written. Let this be the silence that screams louder than their darkest spell. Let this be the moment their world never recovers from. Not because it ended, but because it continued without them. You were the Omen they didn't foresee, and now you're the future they can't erase. And if they ever whisper again, if they ever try to raise their heads from the mud they now call home, let them feel it. That chill, that silence, that presence. Let them know the Omen walks still, that justice isn't a chapter, it's the entire damn book. And you're the one holding the pen.